upon you all. I hope everyone's doing well and had a good weekend, inshallah. I just wanted to talk about some reflections that I've taken away from the ICNA. Uh, Honestly, it was a last minute planning to even go there. Um, but there were few events that I was very interested in, and the one that I'm obviously doing this upload about, which is the homeschooling. And I don't know if you guys were aware of what's going on in terms of public school and education really in the West or any of its allies. It's probably the same thing, but I can't speak for that. I just know what's going on within North America, right? And the ability to not even educate or have the choice to educate your kids about certain topics, right? And essentially other people's religions, right? And I say religion is a way of life. It's not. It doesn't have to be like Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, and all of that. Just a person's belief is his religion. It's his way of life. And what you see nowadays is the secular religion of trying to push their agenda of literally brainwashing 3, 4-year-old kids to accept and essentially because they lack the truth within themselves. And they say like, oh, we're trying to force our opinions on them, and meanwhile they're the ones forcing their opinion, trying to validate or make us accept their existence, and maybe that's an incorrect statement. Like, they're trying to seek truth within themselves by trying to get everyone's approval about themselves, because they themselves, like, when you lack the confidence or the proof or the truth within yourself, you try to seek it in others, and subhanallah, they're so blind to that. Like, the hypocrisy of their beliefs is like, I have to accept their truth, but they won't accept mine. Or I have to accept their opinion, but they won't accept mine, right? And obviously there's hypocrisy in that, but we're not here to discuss that. We have to come up with a solution. And the solution is obviously to get away from public schools. That's not an option anymore. And is Islamic school an option or not? And that question was asked to the panel within the ICNA convention for the homeschooling topic. And it was between the brother Mikhail Smith from Qalam Institute and his wife, who was also on the panel, and the third sister, which I forgot her name. And the topic basically discusses homeschooling, right? Basically misconception, like, can homeschooling be for you? Is it worth it? What are the positives and negatives of homeschooling? And basically, is it something that you can do or not? And if you can, which states would allow you or would be good options for that? And we'll start from the beginning. One of the misconceptions about homeschooling is that you need to be like someone with a degree to teach your kids, right? And everyone on that panel has experience and are in the process and have been for a couple of years of teaching their kids already, or have been homeschooling their kids. And they gave it from the perspective of 2 states, New Jersey and Texas. And they recommended these 2 states because of the legislations or laws in terms of curriculum and how easy it is, right? So you don't have to have proper or an actual degree to teach your kids. Obviously, knowing the subject matter makes it easy, right? Like, if you're good in math, you're gonna probably have an easier time teaching your kids math. If you're good in English, and so on. But you get to make your own curriculum. And they've provided a few sources, which I'll give in the description later on, in terms of a curriculum. And the other misconception was, homeschooling your kids will make them antisocial. And from what they said was, it's actually the opposite, and I would actually agree with that in a sense, because like, when you're going to school, even though you're dealing with people, you have to, it's like so robotic, right? Go to the classroom, you sit inside, you listen to the teacher talk, they give you some handouts, you fill the handouts, you go home, you study, and or do the paperwork. Next day, same thing, very little project work. So it's very boring, very mundane. So aside from that, the kids themselves hate school, or have this hateful relationship towards school because it's not engaging, right? And that's a positive of homeschooling. is that you can make your education fun for your kids. You can, for example, when you're learning about science, discussing animals or anything, you can take them to a zoo or a park and talk about the plants, and they get to feel, see, touch it. So there's a lot of benefits in terms of engagement with the school, and from their perspective, their kids loved learning, right? Which is something that most of the kids have nowadays, is that learning aspect of education, right? Or I'm sorry, the love of education, the love of learning. That's something that is lost. Aside from the repetitive, like I feel like you're going through 18, 20 years of school of repetitive information, like same type of US history for like 5, 6 years. Like, it's repetitive, it's boring, and it gets you nowhere, honestly. Versus you can see what your kids likes, what you excel, so you could increase them in that and kind of shift them and guide them in that direction. Now, in terms of one of the most, I think, is the most important aspect of this is the parent relationship with the child. When you go to school, right, your parents kind of like drop you off. The teacher plays the teacher role, right? And I'll talk about why that's bad. And I actually talked about that perspective as well, that the teacher role should really be the parents, right? And I'll get into it later on. So the relationship you have with your children is like you're the one, you spend a lot more time with them, right? There's open communication versus like I drop you off in school, I see you 10 hours later, I go home, I'm tired, everybody does their own little thing. So there's a very big disconnect within the family. And one of the panel members said that she was best friends with her children, right? Like she takes them everywhere. She goes to coffee, she grabs her kids, right? They have a very good bond, a very good relationship. And subhanAllah, like that's something that's missing within our society today, right? Is that parent-children relationship, because of the disconnect of going to school all the time, or you're working, by the time you come back home, you're tired, you don't have patience for your kids. But at the opposite, you have a lot more time, you're building a bond of communication, right? So it's very beneficial from that perspective. You can also go to college at like age 14, 15 instead of 18. So you get the whole process done way quicker, right? And sometimes, honestly, American school feels like it's a waste of time. It's not really tailored for competition or making you excel in a specific field. It's more about money, and especially when you get to college, you see that, right? That it's more about money. So, assalamu alaikum, guys, for those who are watching. How are you? So we're just discussing the aspects of good and bad in terms of homeschooling. And honestly, from what I've discussed and heard, it has a lot more positives than it does negative. And in terms of the curriculum, they said even if you don't understand the subject, you can also outsource that. I hope the mic is okay, actually. I know I have the AC running in the background because it's really hot in New York. And I plan to watch that episode out of Osman later on, so we'll see what happens. Yeah, sorry, lost track of my thoughts. But basically, homeschooling has a lot of benefits in terms of like just building your family structure. It may be hard, and some people cannot afford to provide that, right? Like if the mother has to work, the father has to work at the same time to make a living, right? At the same time, like who's raising your kids, right? In terms of like schooling, right? And the way I describe it is like imagine yourself imagine a room that's empty. Like imagine this room, I'm moving into this room, and I have all this stuff in the house, and I have to remove it, right? Clean house before I move in, right? And this room is essentially your brain or your child's brain. And it's empty when you first move in. And when you if you're the one moving in, meaning you're the teacher, you're the one who gets to decide what things, ideas, essentially, move into this room. But if you send them to school, a lot of the times they learn things, right? So that's why I give the example of like, you have to move a lot of things out, but sometimes in the process, like I have nails in that wall, right? There's things that I've hung, there's stains maybe on the wall that may be impossible to take out, or they'll leave a mark eventually, right? And it's the same with ideas, like trying to unbrainwash your kids from the trauma that they may get from schools or these bad experience may have a long-lasting effect on them. So in a way, like, you know, the empty room that you have more control over what ideas goes in gives your child a better space, right? But for me, homeschooling, one of the most important aspects is the relationship you have with your kids. Honestly, you're the one. Like I said, when one of that panel members, she said, "My kids are my best friends," right? That's what most of the parents complain about when they're talking about, I can't talk to my kids, I can't communicate with them, I have no relationship with my child. Like, that's everyone right now, right? Because we drop our kids off at school in the morning, we pick them up, they come eat, they spend whatever time on their TV, computers, life, you know, there's a big disconnect, and the parents are tired, they just want to relax. So there is no relationship. So you have removed yourself from being the teacher and from being the friend that they should look up to, right? Some parents have that relationship, but it's very hard, like I said, when you have working parents and so on. And the curriculum is not as hard as I thought it would be, honestly. And that's how I realized even school, I knew school in America taught you, like I said earlier, a lot of waste of time information, right? Same history class for like 4 or 5 years. Same literally math unless you major into something specific. So it's very mundane and boring. Versus like when you're teaching your kids, like I said, it's more interactive. You can take them to the park. You can teach them about plants. You can, and you can teach them to socialize more, right? Some people said, well, homeschooling will make my kids antisocial. And they said, the panel, they were like, the argument is that it's way better because you're there with them interacting, like, okay, go to the supermarket and you're checking out with the cashier, you're teaching them how to handle money. Okay, this is how you talk, this is how you deal with things. Take them to the masjid, you know, interacting with others. So it's not as antisocial as you think it is, or it may seem to be. They're actually getting more experience. And as a matter of fact, you would teach them to be a part of their community more with that available time that they have, you know. So it's very important and very good. Let me see, can I see the chat? I don't know if I can actually see the chat. But that's kind of what I wanted to share with you guys in terms of homeschooling, because I foresee that growing significantly within the United States, especially because of how the education system is nowadays. That, like I said at the beginning, with basically them teaching the kids their confusions, right? Because they're definitely confused themselves and they're hypocrites in terms of their teachings and their beliefs. And they're trying to corrupt our children as well. And by the way, this is not Muslims only that are thinking like this. This is people who are Christians, who are some Jewish, and some people who are just, they don't even atheists, right? Some atheists don't have that belief. They still believe like, okay, you should not be educating 3, 4, 5-year-olds about this topic. Some may differentiate on the age, like, okay, teenagers, all right, but at least the 3, 4-year-old, they don't even know what they want for breakfast, let alone what their gender is, right? And it's becoming ridiculous, honestly, subhanAllah, to the point that I really just want to leave the US. Like, I'm talking to my wife about this, and I'm like, if I cannot homeschool within the US, we're looking to move outside of the US. This is unacceptable for me. And even if I go abroad to any other country, if I still can't homeschool, like, I definitely foresee homeschool being as a good option, because nowadays you cannot escape the corruption from within a school perspective. Which brings me to the other question that was asked towards the end, was like, how about Muslim schools? One of the fathers, he said, well, why, let's say the parents are working, why can't Muslim schools be an option? And they said, because both the females on the panel were Islamic studies teachers, so they taught in Islamic schools. And they said that most of the kids are exposed to the same ideas. Yes, they're not being taught, about homosexuality and these things from a young age, or any age at all, as a matter of fact, but in terms of like the exposure of other kids, you don't know what they're being exposed to in terms of their parents, how much of an upbringing they're actually incorporating into their life. So in effect, it also corrupts your kids. So from a homeschooling perspective, it is a lot more beneficial than going to public school, let alone Islamic school. But I understand that some people may not have, like I said, the time, the money, or the education in terms of Islam. But like I said, you could also outsource the things that you lack in. If you're good at English and math, but you don't have the Islamic education, you could outsource that information outside. And as a matter of fact, you could learn and sit with your kids, and the benefit, you could teach them, like, listen, this is something that I don't know, but this is how we attain that knowledge, which is a knowledge, that's a knowledge within itself, to teach your kids how to attain knowledge or how to seek out truth or information when you lack it. Like, you're not going to have the answer to everything. You're not going to be perfect. So here is the solution, and here is how to attain the solution if you don't know how. So overall, that was probably one of my favorite sessions at the ICNA convention, and sadly, it was the least packed. I honestly thought there would be a room full of people in that classroom. I would say there was a lot of people, but it wasn't like packed, right? Versus other events, we flock to speakers and scholars and shuyukh, not scholars. We flock to speakers, and we kind of glorify them in a way. But that's another topic for another day. It's okay to, I think it's okay to look up to someone, right? But there's some you know, when you idolize someone to that degree, I don't know, I just see it as a negative thing than a positive, right? There's respect, and there's you idolizing someone, and I think that line is also very thin. But I've been talking for 17 minutes, and yeah, that should be enough, inshallah. If you guys have any questions or feedback, let me know what you think. Like, is homeschooling an option that you would take? Is that something that you have been considering? And maybe we could even build a group together to discuss, like, you know what, I found this resource to be good. You know, where we can all help each other out, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace.